Okay, this is AP Lit, and on Thursday, and we're talking about the summer reading book. They're going to turn in the essay, and they're just going to share their thesis and the 3 points. I think you can share all that, and we don't deal everything, and summarize the book unless you're the second or third person to read it, and we already know it. So, any volunteers to go first? All right, Davis.
Do you want me to stand and sit here?
Stay
in your seat. Don't mess up, man.
Alright. So, my thesis was that the most important themes in Billy Budd are purity, envy, and obligation to duty. I said purity was an important theme because it's introduced really early on in the book. And like Billy Budd is supposed to be this pretty much completely pure character. He doesn't really have any like sinful characteristics. And the theme kind of carries on and stays relevant all the way to the end when Billy is condemned to death. The author makes a point to show us that his natures remain unchanged and that he's still pure. And it's also important because it causes, or it's part of one of the causes of the conflict in the story. And the other part of that conflict is my second point, which was one of the most important themes, was the theme of envy. And so like, unlike Billy Budd, James Claggart is like a completely corrupt character. We're told that he, just by nature, is like a sinful person. And he's envious of Billy Budd and his purity. And this causes him to not like Billy Budd, and this causes conflict in the book. Which eventually leads to the climax where the captain confronts Claggart and Billy for Billy possibly being part of a mutiny, which Claggart's trying to frame him for, and Billy accidentally kills Claggart. And then this conflict also spawns the third point, which is that one of the important themes is obligation to duty, because after Billy kills Claggart, Captain Veer, I don't really know how to say his name, but he has like a kind of unofficial trial to determine what to do with Billy, but ultimately the decision is up to him. And personally he really likes Billy, but he knows that he has a duty as a captain to kind of keep order and like prevent a mutiny, and to do that you would have to condemn Billy, and it makes him really conflicted. However, he eventually gives into his obligation to duty and condemns Billy Budd to death. So yeah, that's why purity and envy and obligation to duty are the most important themes in Billy Budd.
Anybody else gonna talk about Billy Budd? All right, I don't want to steal anything, so I'll wait till after you, but it was something I was gonna ask you, so, would you like to go next since you did the same book? One thing Davis didn't do, he really didn't, which is fine, but maybe you could summarize the book real briefly, like what's Billy Budd about?
Okay, so basically Billy Budd starts out as the character Billy. He was on a merchant ship, but then he gets like selected to be part of the military in the British Royal Navy on like a warship. He didn't have the ability to choose if he wanted to go or not. But then on the ship, there's this character Claggart, as Davis was saying, and he was always really jealous of Billy. So he tries to frame Billy for doing something, or for starting a rebellion on the ship, which he did not. And Billy gets really mad and hits Claggart on the forehead, and Claggart eventually dies from that. And so, Billy was completely innocent because he didn't mean to kill him. It was just his rage got to him, and that's what caused him to do that. And then Captain Veer had to kind of choose between, he was the captain, and he had to choose what was best for Billy and what was best for the crew for his punishment kind of. So he was thinking about not punishing Billy because he did it on accident, but he was also thinking about what was best for the crew and what was his obligation and duty to do to Billy for killing. So he ultimately has to punish Billy for killing someone under Navy law like the individual versus like society, like what's best for society.
What was your thesis and what did you?
I did the three most important themes in Billy Budd were uncontrollable rage, innocence, and individual versus society.
Why don't you briefly tell what you did with each one of them?
For uncontrollable rage, I did when Billy kills Claggart, because Billy did not mean to kill Claggart. He just did it because he was angry, and at that moment he decided not to like defend himself, but just he felt like the only option was to hurt the person who accused him. And then for innocence, I was doing Billy did not mean to kill Claggart, so Billy was innocent. He still committed the crime, but it's like today when like you accidentally kill someone, like it's not murder, it's like manslaughter. So it was kind of like he didn't mean to. So he was innocent at that point. And then individual versus society is what Captain Beer has to go through between deciding what is best for Billy and what is best for like the whole crew and Navy in general.
Thank you. So some people have said, it's been years since I read it and taught it, but that Billy is a Christ figure, and in the innocence, and then think about how he was an innocent man too. He was not, well, that's debatable, right? He did kill the guy, so he deserved punishment, but still, he seemed to die, like you said, the individual had to die for the good of the whole ship. He would have lost control. Right, good job.
Question, what's the setting of this, like, time period?
It's like late 1800s.
Oh, okay.
It's kind
Melville.
of, at the like kind of in a transition between like old and like industrial revolution.
Gotcha.
Herman Melville, Moby Dick, he wrote it.
Gotcha.
All right, good. Who'd like to go next? Yeah.
So the book I read was To Kill a Mockingbird. And I talked about the central themes in the book, and the ones that stood out to me the most were education, law, and lying. Education was the main theme because it just shows what schools were like back then, and how they solely just taught on technique and they didn't teach any moral skills. And Atticus at home is the one teaching Scout all these moral and this other knowledge they don't teach her at school, and that kind of sets her apart. And then the other theme that I saw was the theme of law, and this can be seen in the big case that kind of shapes the whole book, of Atticus defending the man who raped Mrs. Ewell, or
Ewell.
yeah.
Mayella.
Yeah, and in this we can see that on paper the justice system seemed perfect. They each showed their side of the story. They had witnesses, but the jury was biased in that they were all white, and especially in the 1930s in Alabama, African Americans were looked at differently. And then the last theme that I saw was the theme of lying, and the main thing that stuck out to me was like how a lie can create so much commotion in the city. And pretty much the main lie is of the lady being accused of being raped, and that kind of drives a lot of the plot, and Atticus is chosen to defend him. And this can be seen as that lie was a bad lie, and then the other lie we see at the end is Boo Bradley, when I forgot who it was, but Atticus, they lied about that Mr. Ewell, they lied that he fell on his knife and killed himself instead of Boo actually murdered him. And this I saw as like a good lie and for a good cause. And I feel like the author was trying to show us that like sometimes lying is bad, but sometimes it's the last resort, and that it's okay.
Very good. I've never thought of the fact that Bob Ewell dies outside the justice system, but it's really justice. Tom Robinson dies inside the justice system, but it's really injustice. And so it's like perfect retribution for Ewell. They took things in their own hands. Although that was an act of no one. He meant to kill him, right?
Yeah, he saw
Yeah.
that he was like attacking
Yeah.
Scout and Jim, and it was right at his house. So
Yeah.
he came out
Okay.
and he stabbed him.
All right, very good. Thank you. Who wants to go next? Okay, Senator.
I'll go next. So I wrote my paper on Jack London's to Build a Fire and other short stories. Unfortunately, it's a little bit hard to write as a thesis because it's a collection of individual short stories, but I did my best with it.
I was gonna say pick one to tell
Yeah,
us.
I picked a couple that best exemplify
Alright.
the themes. So I said that in Jack London's book of short stories, the central themes are the ideas of mortality, death, and the dangers of the Northlands. And then these ideas are specifically emphasized in the three stories of Lost Face, That Spot, and To Build a Fire. And so the theme of death is best exemplified in the story To Build a Fire, in which, to briefly summarize, more or less, a man freezes to death on his way to arrive at another outpost because of his ignorance of the conditions of the land he's in. And actually it applies to most all of the stories, because almost all of the stories end with the death of the character you are following in the story. And it seems very commonplace in the books, and it seems to be kind of an ending theme for each of them. The idea of mortality is emphasized in Lost Face, a story in which a man tricks the Native Americans who have captured him into killing him plainly instead of torturing him. And it's, in the sense, he confronts his own mortality and chooses the lesser of two evils in that situation, and tricks them into thinking he has a medicine that can stop things from cutting him. And so he tells them to chop at his neck with it after he's put it on there, and they just end up beheading him instead of torturing him.
Which story was this?
This is Lost Face.
Never heard of that. That sounds interesting.
The name of the story comes from, at the end, that the chief is disgraced because instead of doing what they wanted, the man got to go out on his own terms. So he lost face, or that is.
Okay.
And then finally, the idea of the dangers of the North is emphasized in the story That Spot, in which a man refuses to put down one of the dogs who is pulling his sled, but it ends up almost killing him, and in fact killing him in the end of the story, because the dog then steals his food and endangers him in a number of ways throughout the story. And also, in general, most all the stories exemplify the dangers of the North and things that happen there, both the freezing temperatures and the roaming Native American tribes at the time, and also the animals and wildlife.
Very interesting. I don't know about this. Maybe if you read about it, I was gonna say he's a socialist. Did you read anything about him?
Not really.
Yeah, I'm
I
not-
read his other stories. His other stories seem much more lighthearted.
Yeah.
These
One-
ones were very much morbid and kind of dark.
He is what do you say, transcendental? Anyway, he's not transcendental, I'm sorry, it's the wrong word. Naturalist in the sense that nature has no sympathy for man. And I remember To Build a Fire, he was not only ignorant, but he was arrogant. You know, he'd say, why are you doing it? He's like 60 degrees below zero, and he wants to go to find his gold mine or whatever, and he just ignored. He thought he was a bit
He
better than.
ignored the person he met said the warning that 50 degrees below means 80 degrees of frost.
Yeah, it's astonishing. And remember the dog.
The dog, oh
Just
yeah,
looks
he has
at
a dog
him.
with him who more or less ends up in the end of the story moving on and going away and realizing that the human end up killing themselves.
Right, the dog is smarter than the human, you know, in that condition. very good stuff. I never teach any of that anymore.
Yeah,
We work-
it was a little bit hard to write a thesis on, because they're kind of more or less, there's some themes throughout, but they're kind of disconnected. They very much start on their own and end on their own, and
Well,
don't
having a-
connect to each other.
Having a story per topic was a good way to do it.
Yeah.
That was easy to follow. Thank you. Next, Todd, what about you?
I read 1776 for my book, and I talked about the central theme of struggle. I mean, the book was mostly about like the struggle that America had against Britain in the Revolutionary War, with how unprepared and how little manpower and supplies they had, and they were fighting one of the best armies in the world at that time. And it just kind of went through like the battles that happened throughout the Revolutionary War, kind of like what led up to it a little bit. And it also talked about the struggles that they had with like lack of experience as well from some of the commanders, and a lot of lack of order. And they were also fighting German mercenaries, which were also some of the best soldiers that they could fight.
What was your thesis?
Like the main theme of the book is struggle, because the book talks about the struggle between the United States of America and Britain.
Thank you. Let me see this here. Hello? Max, is he leaving? Okay.
Max.
Do your paper real quick.
You said
Speed
these
run
are-
it.
Speed run it.
Speed run it.
Speed run it.
Wait, what?
You don't know what that's about?
Am I with?
Yeah. You probably should go up,
You should
but
go to
I'd
the
like to
hospital.
hear.
You might have COVID.
I mean, I don't know. Do you want me to say mine real quick? Or?
Yeah, speed
Um,
run, speed
sure.
run.
Really quick, really quick.
Okay. So my thesis was Gods in General is a great book that everyone should read because it shows.
Gods in general.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Because it shows a sense of humanity for both sides of the Civil War. It highlights the importance of good leadership, and it displays the gruesomeness of war. The book goes back and forth between these four main characters: Robert E. Lee, Winfield Scott Hancock, Stonewall Jackson, and Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. And the book is written in a way where during like conflicts and battles, it will switch between these different characters, and the reader is like kind of split between who like they're like rooting for in a way, and it writes each character in a way where they're all morally good and they're doing to the best of their ability what they perceive as good. So there's no clear right and wrong in this book. It's just men trying to fight for what they perceive as what is good. And then we also see a necessity for good leadership, as there are countless blunders and orders that like commanders order their men into like folly and like death. We see this in Fredericksburg, where Burnside, even knowing that the Confederates were entrenched up on the heights above Fredericksburg, he still orders his men to like charge up the hills pretty much to their death as they're being like just shot up with cannons and like just being slaughtered. And it also it shows how horrible war is. It doesn't like glorify the bloodshed, and it shows this by like in the end, Stonewall Jackson is shot and killed by his own men, who and it kind of ends with this kind of like solemn note in a way. So
Well, thank you. I like that.
Yeah.
Go Max, go.
Go, Max, go.
Madison, if you like, yes.
I got some water.
Can you wait right after Madison?
Yeah.
All right.
My thesis is that book to kill a mockingbird displays many of our current racial problems in our world, like racial inequality, racial injustice, and racial profiling. And I basically just explain all these and compare and explain how Tom Robinson, a colored person, was accused falsely of raping Bob's daughter after seeing them get close, and he was brought to court for it. And Bob points in his like false accusation for butthead of Tom because he was white and seen as superior. But one person advocate stated all men were created equal and thought everyone should have a fair trial like everyone else. But because he was arguing for a colored person, it didn't save Tom. And like today, some of this stuff still happens.
Yeah, did you enjoy the book? Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah,
I haven't finished mine, but I'm also doing To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, basically, my thesis, I mean, I couldn't tell you exactly what it is because I don't have it in front of me, but I mean, one part is that the book is, I'm struggling here. It's heavily about, obviously about the racial struggle. I mean, it's also based in, Alabama during the Great Depression. So I mean, even people who weren't colored were, struggling. It was hard times for the country as a whole. And a lot of it is about how morally, Atticus Finch is one of the better characters of really any book in terms of like just being a really, really good person. And he has this incredible quote about you can never really understand a man until you climb in his skin and crawl around him. And what he's saying here is that no matter what you think of a person, you can never truly understand like why they do what they do and how they operate, because you're not them. And it's just that simple. Like you're not someone else. So it's hard to really judge someone if you don't know them like you know yourself, and you can never know someone like you know yourself. So in that sense, it's like, really unfair to someone like Tom Robinson who got judged just by the color of his skin, even though he was a good person. Whereas Bob Ewell was a horrible person, and he was actually the one raping his own daughter. And like Ethan was saying, he did get that justice at the end from who saved Scout and Jim's lives. I mean, I don't really know what else to say because I haven't finished
yeah,
it.
well,
But, like,
that's really helpful, yeah. When you were talking about the prejudice thing, I'm seeing all the people that Scout had to learn to respect, like the woman who had the pistol, the old lady next door. Hang on. Madison, you remember this, the lady that had the pistol next door and Scout hated her?
the old Confederate lady.
Yeah, and then he found out that she was dying of cancer. I think it was Boo Radley and the Cunningham boy, you know
Al
why?
Cunningham, yeah.
The teacher didn't understand the Cunningham kid. And Scout had to tell the teacher things she didn't know, so that's a really good thing.
And then there's a quote where Scout was talking to like their maid, Cal Cunningham.
Yeah.
Saying like, Cal, he's not coming, he's just a Cunningham. Just because he was that dirt poor, but he didn't do anything to deserve being treated like that. I mean, he has no control over the fact that like his parents don't have any money, and like he lives out in the middle of nowhere.
And Calpurnia, who is black and probably being persecuted in some respects herself, shows respect for a young white boy. She understands that you don't judge people. So really, the more you think about it, if you've never read it, you need to read it. Tyler will finish
That was
up
last
for us.
year's reading.
I read A Doll's House, which is a play set near Christmas time that focuses on problematic relationship within the family. Pretty much the wife, Nora, took out a loan from another member of the town named Krogstad to send her and her husband on the trip to Italy to save his life. But since taking out a loan, being in debt is such a bad part at that time, people kind of look down on that, so she doesn't want people to know about it. So her husband ends up taking over the bank and fires Krogstad, and Krogstad threatens to release the details regarding the loan and stuff, and how Nora had forged her own father's signature on it, because her father had been dead, and had proof of it if he was alive. So Nora and her husband get in a fight, and she leaves, pretty much. Even after Krogstad came back and wrote another letter and said that he wouldn't do that, he was apologizing for what he had caused. So I said the critical thing of this play risking her well-being, financial well-being, and her reputation for her husband's health. And ultimately, she does that even though the risk that it has. And then the relationship with her children, I said, showed this familial obligation because even though she left her children, she left because she did not feel that she was right to bring them up. And she felt that her presence was degrading their moral stability. So her leaving was for the better of her own kids. And then I said that the actions of the other characters, such as Miss Lynn, who was a widow and who had no children, we see that the importance of family because she's described as lonely and sad because she has no family or no one with her.
Thank you. It's a strong, we might say feminist book too, about the roles of women, and I've heard a lot about it. I read it literally 50 years ago in AP English, and I remembered nothing about it, so I appreciated that. Well, I need those, so you can put them in the basket. Make sure the prompt is on top, and, yeah.
I don't have a.
Yeah, put in there anyway. I'll put one on top.
What's the
By prompt, you just mean the assignment.
Yeah, the assignment, right.
Yeah.
All right, guys, go ahead and sit down. We got 5 minutes.
I don't know if they're like, it's set yet, but I'll let you know.
Couldn't it actually?
Okay, we are, remember, going to have a quiz Tuesday,
Yeah.
guys? We're gonna have a quiz Tuesday on the words back here and the glossary, abstract through bibliography, and we're gonna be pretty consistent as we work through the book. Wanna, have quizzes on all of them, have something, some assessment on all, that'll be Tuesday. Tomorrow, what is tomorrow? Okay, tomorrow we were gonna go back to the poetry, and I thought if we had a minute, which that's about all we have, would you get that out in just a minute? I think I gave you, if you have your book, I believe I gave you these.
I got tiger.
All right, so the Wordsworth poems, and, now that's not what we were doing. We were doing the, the Blake poem, so. Were we able to talk about the Little Lamb, right?
Yeah, we did.
All right, did we read the Tiger?
Yeah, so we left off on, like, we wrote the tiger just by ourselves, we didn't discuss it as a class.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, get it out, just a couple things about the Tiger, page 50, what is it? We'll read it again.
Yeah, we'll read it.
I'll read it, hang on. All right, Tiger by, and just listening to the poem, that's one of the things, we've asked you to do is, even if you can't read it out loud, literally, you can read it listening to it, you can hear the words in your head. So, notice the difference between this and Little Lamb, who made thee, dost thou know who made thee, and this nursery rhyme effect here. Notice the difference. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain, and what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp, dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? And we don't have time to do much with it, but did you notice, having read it now twice and listening to it, what's the difference in sound in the two poems? Did you notice there's a difference in sound? That does not sound like a nursery rhyme. Why? Why should it not sound like a nursery rhyme?
It's not talking about, it's talking about, something more, fearful, serious, evolution.
That's right. So it's very inappropriate. Did you notice, the major metaphor that runs through the poem that ties it together? Like, who made the lamb? You know, we talk about the gentle and kind creator, but who made the tiger? It's not a gentle, sweet person. What is the person that makes? Now, it's God, but how is he described? What's the impression you get of God based on the creation?
Stronger, harsher.
Yeah, and in the poem, he almost just sounds like a what do you call it, a blacksmith. So you have anvils, and you have fire, and you have furnace, and you have hammer and chains. So the person who the creator is it's the same creator. What does that tell you about the creator? Last question. That the creator who made the little sweet little lamb and came as a lamb also made the fierce tiger.
So he could be like scary and kind of like aggressive at the same time.
He can be wrathful, and he can be forgiving. So we'll take a look at that tomorrow, Tuesday, and just be prepared for that, and we'll see you then. Good job.